Morning. Good morning. First of all, it's so great to see so many of you. It's great to be in person. Hope everybody's doing well. Before I get into just saying a few words about today, I wanted to mention that the venue here has requested that if it's okay, please wear a mask. We're not going to mandate it, but they've asked me to mention that. So if you don't mind, that would be great. And again, thanks so much for being here today. We've got a great group of New Yorkers here. Thanks also to everybody that is tuning in online right now. We have about 175 people that signed up to watch this virtually. And a big thank you to our sponsors, United and Airbnb. I'm Jonathan Bowles. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for an Urban Future. If you're not familiar with us, the Center is an independent think tank dedicated to creating a stronger and more equitable economy in New York City. In recent months, our work has advanced concrete ideas for how city government can help ensure an inclusive recovery from the pandemic. We've written about the need to scale up the city's most effective tech training programs, shown why there is so much potential to expand apprenticeships in high-wage industries like tech, finance, and healthcare. Called for extending the state's tuition assistance program to cover part-time students, and urged city government to boost support for entrepreneurs living in NYCHA. But it's also clear to us that reigniting the tourism sector is one of the most important things the city can do to ensure an equitable economic recovery. The city still has about 170,000 fewer jobs than it did right before the pandemic. A huge share of those job losses are related to the decline in tourists. As of last month, the leisure and hospitality industry alone accounts for 35% of the 170,000 jobs that are still lagging citywide. Overall, leisure and hospitality jobs are still down 61,000 jobs since the start of the pandemic, far more than any other major employment sector. That 35% doesn't even include the thousands of additional jobs that still haven't come back at the city's airports, at department stores and other retail businesses that are tied to tourism, and other tourism-connected industries. Ensuring a full tourism recovery is key for so many reasons for New York. In recent decades, tourism became one of New York's 3 or 4 most important industries. It employed nearly 300,000 New Yorkers before the start of the pandemic, and no other sector offered as many accessible jobs, with 91% of tourism jobs open to workers with less than a bachelor's degree. The tourism sector also employs a diverse mix of New Yorkers. More than 65% of the city's residents who work in tourism-related industries are people of color, and 54% are immigrants. Fortunately, there is some good news. The city's tourism sector is on the road to recovery. Tourists have come back even faster than many believed, but the city is still short millions of visitors compared to its pre-pandemic peak, including a significant share of higher spending international tourists. There are also some long-term challenges to reckon with, such as slower recovery for business travel. Today's forum, I'm excited because we are going to delve into a lot of these issues, specifically what more city and state policymakers and leaders can do to accelerate New York City's tourism recovery. We have an excellent group of speakers, first with an all-star panel discussion, and then a one-on-one fireside chat with NYC Company CEO Fred Dixon. Fred, thank you for being here. Before we go to the panel, I'd like to extend a very special thank you to United and Airbnb, our sponsors. We couldn't do this, we couldn't be here without them today, so thank you. And now we're going to hear from one of our sponsors, United's Nick Deppner. Nick is Director of Greater New York Sales at United Airlines, responsible for leading corporate strategy as well as developing new business and engagement opportunities within the region. Please join me in welcoming Nick.
Thank you. Good morning. As was said, I'm Nick Debner. I'm Director of Sales here for the Tri-State region, and like all of you, very excited to be here talking about how we accelerate New York City's tourism recovery. With as many of you here from city and state leaders, tourism agencies, and economic development officials, we really want to work with you to explore all of the actions that we can take to boost the recovery of New York's tourism economy. Reviving the tourism sector for us it's not only the city's top challenge, and while there are very encouraging signs that the tourism sector is on the road to recovery, I think we can all agree that the city is not where it is or where it was pre-pandemic. At United, we've been a proud member of the New York community for over 90 years, offering the most flights to the most destinations around the world. And with more than 430 daily flights to top business markets in Chicago, Houston, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and international destinations like Johannesburg, Tel Aviv, Mumbai, and Tokyo, we fly to more cities from New York than any other airline. In fact, we've long anticipated a strong demand recovery for international travel, the all-important international travel, and recently launched our largest transatlantic expansion in our history. So in total this year, we've launched or resumed about 30 transatlantic flights, including nonstop flights to leisure destinations that no other North American airline serves, including Palma de Mallorca, Spain, Ponta Delgada in the Azores, Bergen, Norway, and Tenerife in the Spanish Canary Islands, and those are all departing from our hub here at Newark Liberty. Additionally, we're growing service to popular business destinations and tourist hubs with new service to Nice, expanding our London flights to 7 daily flights with hourly service in the evening, and just recently expanded our Cape Town service to year-round. So overall, when we talk about the recovery and the role that we at United can and want to play, we are 25% larger in New York this summer than we were in 2019, and I, as well as all of United, we're happy about that. And I know, we're going to come out of this pandemic as the largest airline across the Atlantic for the very first time in history. So the road to the tourism sector in New York and the recovery of it is truly, truly vital to us. Not only because we connect people to the moments that matter the most, but because it presents massive employment opportunities. We heard about some of the small businesses and some of the airline concessions not being able to reopen. But at United, from the flight deck to the aircraft galley, our airport operations, and our maintenance hangar, we are adding thousands of jobs right here in New York alone. And that the recovery of the tourism sector and business as well is crucial to our plan. You see, last year we announced our United Next plan, which includes the purchase of 270 brand new Boeing and Airbus aircraft, the largest combined order in the airline's history and by any airline in the previous decade. And so when we combine with that current order, we expect to introduce more than 500 new narrow-body aircraft, meaning that in 2023 alone, United's fleet will, on average, be adding about one new narrow-body aircraft every 3 days. So obviously we have to have a place to put them, and we want to stick them here in New York, right? So this United Next plan is going to have a very transformational effect on the customer experience. We're expecting to increase the total number of seats available per domestic departure by almost 30%. We're going to significantly lower carbon emissions per seat. And more importantly, we're going to create 50,000 quality, many of which will be unionized jobs by 2026 across the United States, including up to 5,000 here in the New York City area alone. So today's conversation, I'm sure, is going to offer all of us great ideas on how we can, further and together collaborate to accelerate the tourism recovery and just New York in general, and really lay the groundwork for a stronger economy here in the future. So again, thank you for joining us this morning. Now I'll turn it over to the Center for an Urban Future's Eli Dvorkin to start our panel.
Nick, thanks so much for the warm welcome and for your support today. My name is Eli Dvorkin. I'm the Editorial and Policy Director at the Center for an Urban Future, and it's my great pleasure to moderate today's conversation. So I'll go ahead and introduce our wonderful panelists. I'll also just mention for our audience here and online, you can follow this discussion online at NYC Future on Twitter. There will be opportunities to ask questions of our panelists as well. We'll save time at the end, so feel free to start to collect your thoughts now, and feel free to tweet at us at NYC Future, and I can take some questions that way as well. But let me begin by introducing our wonderful panelists, starting on my far side. Nicole Evans is a founding board member and executive director of Harlem Park to Park, a social enterprise of 300 plus entrepreneurs committed to Central Harlem. And Nicole is also the co-founder of Harlem Festival of Culture, a reimagining of the historic 1969 festival coming to Harlem next year. Welcome, Nicole. Great to have you. We're also joined today by Anthony Ramirez. Anthony's the co-founder of Mainland Media, a media influence company devoted to improving the image of the Bronx through 3 projects: From the Bronx, Taste of the Bronx, and the Bronx Beer Hall, a craft beer destination in the heart of the historic Arthur Avenue Market. Welcome, Anthony.
Thank you.
We're also joined by Andrew Ridgey. Andrew, you may have seen About Town if you've been anywhere in New York City. You may have seen Andrew. He's the executive director of the New York City Hospitality Alliance, an association that represents restaurants and nightlife venues all over the city. Andrew's also the chair of the New York City's Office of Nightlife Advisory Board and vice chair of Community Board 7 in Manhattan, and a member of the state and city's COVID-19 committees. Great to have you with us, Andrew.
Thank you.
To his left is Tim Tompkins. Tim is the founder of Shared City, Shared Space, a consultancy focused on creating more prosperous, vibrant, and equitable cities. Tim served for nearly 20 years as president of the Times Square Alliance and is former chair of the International Downtown Association, former co-chair of the New York City Bid Association, and founding director of Partnership for Parks. Welcome, Tim. And last but certainly not least, to my right is Peter Madonia. Peter serves as the chairman of the Belmont Business Improvement District, representing the Bronx's Little Italy. Previously, he served as the chief operating officer at the Rockefeller Foundation and as chief of staff to Mayor Michael Bloomberg. He's also the owner of Madonia Bakery, which I will say makes probably the best prosciutto bread in New York City. So check it out if you haven't been there already. Just great to have all of you with us today. Let me start by kind of building on a point that Jonathan made at the beginning in his remarks. I mean, we've seen obviously the incredible power of New York City's tourism economy in recent years as the sector has grown, added so many jobs that are both good and accessible. I want to start a little bit with some context around what the continued impact has been of the decline in tourism. We know that tourism is coming back, but the latest projections suggest that short of the 66 million visitors that we had in 2019, we're going to see something like 56 million maybe by the end of the year. So that's 10 million, visitors unaccounted for. We know that hotel occupancy is still only at about, 65%, somewhere in that range, down 21, 22% versus 2019. So I want to ask all of you, what should be next for the city's agenda to accelerate this recovery? We know that we're in a way better position than we were at this time last year, but we also know that 10 million or so fewer visitors has a huge impact, and not just the immediate impact on those hotel rooms, but on restaurants and retail locations, on arts and nightlife, all across the city. So what should the focus be now moving forward, and where would you like to see the city and state make new efforts to help get this tourism recovery to accelerate? And I open this up to anyone, and I've got questions maybe for all of you, but if anybody wants to jump in right off the top, feel free.
I'll jump in. I mean, it's a hell of a question to start with. So I think, I feel that if you want more tourism and more people to come back to New York, first and foremost, you have to take care of New Yorkers. And right now, we have a lot of issues around, or perceived issues also around safety and cleanliness. And if New Yorkers are happy and if business owners are happy, then you're going to see more people flocking and coming to visit these spaces. We've had great success, around local tourism and promoting local businesses. We've had great success with outdoor dining, especially in Little Italy, Bronx Little Italy. And I think that as we begin to recover, more and more people are coming out. They want to see cleaner, safer spaces.
If I can just a friendly amendment to that, I mean, regional tourism is probably right now more aggressive than international, and I think we need to double down on it. But the public safety issue, I don't think it's perception. I think it's quite real, and I think that affects regional tourism more than it does international, because people get the local news, get the regional news, and it's not pretty. I woke up this morning, the first story I saw was a tour bus operator was slashed by a panhandler. You know, I'm old enough to remember when this city was dubbed Fun City. I think we have to figure out a narrative that gets us back to it being Fun City. And it does start with public safety, but I think that the narrative has to be built out much more broadly. The mayor's trying, I have to say. He's a great advocate for the city, but he's, you know, bumping up against a serious problem.
I think the word narrative is spot on. I mean, that's what we need to do. We need to weave a narrative to tell a story that New York wants to tell to people that not only live here, live in the region, and internationally. You know, it is so difficult to build a positive reputation, to keep a positive reputation. It is very, very easy, especially when day in and day out, wherever you get your news from, you're hearing stories like the one that Peter just said, or if you're in New York and you see an incident happen. It is so difficult to rebuild a positive perception and a positive narrative if you're in a decline. And I think it's really incumbent of folks like us on the stage, all of you, to be out there talking positively about the city. And I even grapple with it. You know, how do you say New York City still is really safe? You can go out to restaurants, you can go out to nightlife, you should be enjoying the city, but also realistically admit, you know, we do have significant challenges. And these challenges, if they're not addressed now, are only going to get worse. So I think part of it is narrative, and I think there needs to be a huge focus on telling all the positive stories. And that really means every single person in this room and around the city needs to be telling stories about all the great things that New York City has to offer, because that, in a sense, can combat those negative stories that are happening. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem like they're slowing down.
I'd like to add, too, just kind of jumping on the stories that we tell. I mean, part of it I think we should do as well is what are the international or even domestic visitors looking for? So what are the trends saying? And what I've been reading is that, you know, one of the fastest growing segments is experience tourism, cultural tourism. People are seeking out experiences that are authentic, that allows them to connect with a cultural experience. They want immersion. And so from my perspective, part of the story, in addition to telling that everyone that New York is safe and clean and a great place to visit, touch on the thing that matters to people right now, which is that having that cultural experience. And in my opinion, there's no better city in the world than New York City to market the fact that we are one of the most culturally diverse cities. We have communities throughout the city. We're a city of neighborhoods. We're a city of cultural neighborhoods. And so leveraging that cultural asset in the marketing of the city so that people can see, wow, if I go to New York City, I can actually travel around the world without leaving New York City. How about saving on that airline ticket? Sorry, United. But you can come to New York City and travel, you know, from each continent. And so being able to leverage that and looking at the local community level and some of the assets that they have, some of the programming that they have, and putting that on the front burner so that people can see what they can experience from a cultural perspective. That's a big part of the New York story, right? New York City story is that we are this melting pot. So I think that's going to be really important, especially since, I mean, that's what everyone is talking about, right? Inclusion, diversity, in addition to safety and et cetera. So I think that's a great place to start as well.
I'd second all the points, and especially that last one. I think it's really important to think of New York City as a product that is competing in a competitive marketplace, and I think there's some analogies from the digital world. Number one, you have to have a good user experience. You know, are you comfortable? How do you navigate? And the user experience in New York City and in many cities is your experience in the public spaces, streets, sidewalks, subways, parks. And the user experience in New York City is not great and has gotten worse. Second, you've got to pay attention to the content. You know, if you're Spotify and you only had Madonna, people aren't going to keep coming back. You've got to have Shaka Khan and and the Berlin Philharmonic and John Coltrane and have a lot of different offerings. As just said, we have all those offerings, but are they being are the dots being connected, and is there an actual investment, which we don't have the capacity for with our current levels of funding, to actually beef up those assets and those offerings so that they can fit into a tourism economy? And then the third thing is, when you have a product, a good user experience, interesting and repetitive, growing content, diversified content. And third, you've got to market and push it, and especially if you've got some brand challenges, which we do right now, there's got to be money pumped into doing what NYC and Company does so well, but sustained funding for it. We got to pump a lot of money from the COVID funds, but New York City has never had sustained funding that's linked to increased hotel rooms. There's lots and lots of taxes, but those taxes never come back into tourism promotion.
A perfect example is, I often have talked about, you can visit the plains of Africa, the deltas of Asia, and an Amazon rainforest at the Bronx Zoo, the Botanical Garden, then go have an authentic Italian meal in what is a real Little Italy. That's connecting the dots, and I think exactly what Tim's saying.
Agree.
Well, let me pick up on that point, because I want to ask all of you about what more the city and state can do to seize on those opportunities or address those challenges. And just thinking about those points around culture, the cultural experiences that New York offers. I mean, I was thinking recently about the Gates, the Jean-Claude and Christo installation in Central Park, and this was now 15, 20 years ago, right? But it made a huge impression on me. It was up for 2 weeks. In my mind, it was there for a year. It was up for 2 weeks. It saw over 4 million visitors in that span of time. It's just one small example, but I think a powerful one about the power of public art, not just to act. I mean, Central Park wasn't hurting for visitors necessarily, but those folks that came because this was a world-renowned installation, they spent money, they visited, they stayed for several days, they did other things in the city. And I guess I'm thinking a little bit about, one, how important is something like public art in cultivating a stronger, accelerated tourism recovery? But not just is it important, what should the city be doing to unlock this potential in more places? And related to that, obviously so many tourists come to New York for the cultural attractions, but the cultural sector is still hurting. I mean, a report that we published at the Center for Urban Future last year found that collectively, cultural institutions in New York City, large and small, saw over $1 billion in lost revenue since the pandemic began. That led to furloughs and layoffs. It made capacity challenges for cultural institutions to be able to come back. And I see that as obviously deeply connected to the ability of the city's tourism economy to recover. So, this is a pretty wide-ranging question, but I'm curious about what more the city could be doing. If you agree, then, and as Nicola said, that this is such a draw, that New York is, in the marketplace of cities, that New York's unique draw is its cultural attractions. But what should the city be doing either to better promote or support existing cultural venues, to unlock more public art opportunities around the city, or maybe even to invest in new cultural venues or attractions as part of long-range planning? I'm curious if you have thoughts about how the city could actually take new steps in those directions.
I can certainly speak to that. As someone, I've been the executive director for Harlem Park to Park for 13 years, and I'm sure my colleague here that runs Belmont Bid increase the funding to the local community-based organizations that are actually producing the placemaking programming that could be leveraged as the cultural assets we can promote. There is wonderful programming that's happening in these communities that's very much in line with what I'm saying. But as much as NYC and Company is strapped for funds on a local level, it's very difficult for us to get capacity building funds so that we can scale the programming that we produce. So as an example, in Harlem, we produce Harlem Restaurant Week, and we've done it for 12 years. And it's, if not the only, it's one of the only neighborhood-based restaurant weeks. Very successful. But that program, as much as we get quite a bit of media coverage for it, probably more than other communities for their programming. However, I don't have the capacity to market it such that that tour operator that's booking out travels 6 months ahead of time and booking the itinerary for the group of 50 or 100 that they're bringing, I'm not on the radar so that they can bring in those visitors to our community and experience Harlem Restaurant Week or Little Italy. So that's part of the problem is we may we may have wonderful programming, but we're not in a position to scale it so that it can actually be a part of that ecosystem of New York City tourism. And that's really where some of the help is needed from my perspective, from a city and state. These economic development corporations, they give us grant funding, but it's just enough to get the job done and not enough to scale.
Yeah,
And I've been living that for 13 years.
I can echo that. We have this old theater that was used in the 20s and 30s for a local Italian, theater. It's attached to our office space at the bid, and we've done as much renovation as we could afford to do, but we also have a university 2 blocks away, and young people who were dying to use it for music, for art shows, for all sorts of cultural venues, and we'd love to partner with them, but we can't afford to upgrade it to current code standards. And if we did, we could put on something every weekend there. That would be absolutely fabulous. Done for free by the students, and a real attraction, and then there's the rest of the neighborhood to enjoy. So,
I mean, I think it goes back again to what we're saying, experience and authenticity. You know, when you speak about the gates, or you speak about these other areas, whether it's Central Park or in major hubs of the city, you tend to get more focus and more resources. And I think those are places where, yes, you can do these big types of installations that are going to become world-renowned, that people, no matter where they're coming from in the world, are going to go, we have to go to Times Square. We have to go to Central Park. But what Nakoa was saying, I know it's spot on, because I hear from groups around the city. The smaller groups do not have the funding, do not have the bandwidth to embrace and empower their communities to create do stuff authentically. You know, if you were to give support to specific communities, they can create installations, they can create activations and activities and block parties in their neighborhoods that when people come from around the world, they're going to go to this community and go, oh my goodness, that was something so unique I could not find anywhere else.
And there's an analogy in Times Square, and Times Square is a difficult user experience. It's crowded, it's chaotic, but people go there because of the distinctive cultural asset of Broadway. It's the most important driver of visitation in Times Square, but it's a parallel. If what if there were investment like in the Mermaid Parade and Airbnb sort of neighborhood experiences out there with I'm looking at Adrian Benepy from the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, a clustering of assets and programming where there's an actual investment around the Brooklyn Botanic Garden and the Brooklyn Museum, the restaurants on Washington and Vanderbilt Avenue, maybe tie into BAM, and connect those dots. But that requires a sustained multi-year investment, because you've also got to make it easier to get there, more friendly to get there, and the experience. Just an example, Singapore has something called the Tourism Development Fund, where they give grants that supports the creation or rejuvenation of tourism products, which could be like a museum of some sort, and neighborhood organization, supports events that enhance Singapore's positioning as an international lifestyle and business hub, or third, supports productivity and talent development in the tourism sector, building that capacity. If there were real money put into that in neighborhoods throughout New York City, you'd start tapping that talent, creativity, and culture that is there, but connecting the dots. One more example, the Design Festival started as a possible tourism thing. Last administration spun that off to a private entity and a nonprofit, but with no money to create an actual destination driver and demand driver.
I'm going to put my City Hall hat on, and the gates was a really big idea, and former Parks Commissioner Adrian executed it spectacularly, but that big ideas have to come from the mayor. However the idea gets in his head, lots of ways to do that, but the mayor has to put his shoulders into a big idea like that, and it's risky. I don't think I've seen another big idea like that attracts tourism in the last administration, and we'll see in this one, but it really has to come out of City Hall, and City Hall has to put their shoulders into it, or it's not going to happen. And the city does give a lot of money to culturals, but they're generally the big ones, and it's generally capital money, because the city can borrow it, doesn't have to use operating money for it. So I think that getting the sustained operating funds is really what we really need. it's also really hard to get, especially when things get tight, and they will.
But it's good politics to do art and public art and public programming in neighborhoods where you're employing people in the cultural sector, activating public spaces, and creating a draw if you connect the dots in the right way.
But you have to invest in the activation. I mean, even during the pandemic, when you see open streets and open restaurants, you can see the difference of the types of resources certain communities have versus others, and how those areas were activated, and how not only visitors but residents use those areas. You know, some places were amazing with the outdoor dining and setting things up with games and cornhole and, you know, huge 6-foot Jengas, and, you know, local stores, people are setting stuff up, and kids have lemonade stands, and it becomes activated and becomes a public space versus a street, and people remember that, versus some streets that are closed down and it's just nothing, and the cars don't respect, and they go through, and frankly you can't blame them for not respecting, because they're like, why is there a metal gate right here and nothing's even happening, you know, on the street? And what Tim was saying, you need time, because you learn. I mean, I'm on a community board, you mentioned, and you hear when these block parties or, you know, an open street, first there's mistakes. You know, there's a coordination people are doing with limited resources for the first time. So it takes time for people to figure things out and how to make it work. But it takes resources. And I think especially if we want a 5-borough recovery, if we want a different neighborhood recovery, we need to get into the community, share best practices, then empower those neighborhoods to activate their space in a way that, one, the people that live there are going to embrace it, and that when people go to visit, go, oh my goodness, like I said before, I could only get this in New York City. That builds that narrative, you know, and narratives snowball for better or worse. And I think that's what we need to create, and that's what we need to do.
Yeah, I think that's really, really well said. And I think that, you know, as everyone, to echo everyone's sentiments, it takes money, right? It takes foresight. It takes, what it really takes also is to encourage collaboration. And so I think there are a lot of little pockets of, like you said, people that get more money than others or know how to use it more effectively and get more attention than other communities and other neighborhoods. And so, you know, we end up with neighbors or bids that feel like they're competing with one another when they really should be celebrating one another and figuring out ways to work together. And maybe that is a funding track or a grant that, you know, encourages folks to partner up with other organizations in their communities for a larger pot of money. So make sure that it's something that's super inclusive and picks up all those little businesses that are so busy running their 9 to 5 or, you know, midnight to 4 a.m. To actually market themselves and get out there, and they're worrying about day to day and making payroll and things like that.
I'd also like to ask us to kind of redefine sort of what cultural assets mean, right? So we hear, yes, there's money that goes to cultural, right? But usually you think of that, it's the museums, it's public art, et cetera. Culture to me is the people, right? I'm bringing it back to the communities. A lot of the attention when you say cultural funding is the institutions. And so it's actually the culture, the community where I'm saying the resources need to be leveraged. When you look at, you gave an example of what's happening in Singapore. One, you know, I'm a co-founder of Harlem Festival of Culture, which for anyone who saw Summer of Soul, who won the film that won the Oscar, it's the festival that was featured in that film. And we're bringing that back. And part of the reason we're bringing that back is because it is a cultural legacy that we want to reborn. But there's an event in Ghana called Afrochella. That event, the founders of that event work directly with the Ghanaian government. And they have been able, it's in its 5th year, that event single-handedly brings tens of thousands of people to Accra, Ghana. And Forbes, I think, reported that on average, 2 to 3 each one of those visitors is spending between $2,000 and $3,000. So in that 3-day period, you're talking about tens of millions of dollars are coming into the community. And they say that that event has supported the $2 billion economy recovery for Ghana. So that's a cultural destination event. It celebrates African culture, it celebrates African entrepreneurs, people come in, it's all things cultural experience. You can't get more immersive than this. That has been single-handedly one of the biggest drivers of that economy. So when you think about bringing it back to New York City, there are a lot of those kind of examples that tie back to the individual communities that we have. We've got these experiences. They're happening. They just haven't been scaled, right? They're happening in Queens. They're happening in the Bronx. They're happening in Harlem. They're happening in Brooklyn. They're happening in Staten Island. There are so many rich experiences. They just need the support. And unfortunately, the bucket for cultural has been the museums, the art installations, et cetera, and not at this level. So when I talk about culture, cultural preservation, I always bring it back to the people are the culture. And so that, to me, I think we need to redefine. So maybe the funding then, if we add the people to the definition of culture, then maybe the people will get the funding.
I mean, that's a really great point, because we run once a year a gathering called Ferragosto. Ferragosto in Italy is the harvest. It's the middle of August. And the cops tell us we get 20 to 25,000 people, but it's really a day celebration. It's not, businesses are closed. Everybody comes out on the street and offers, whatever it is they produce. But what it does is brings so many people who grew up in that neighborhood back.
Yeah.
You see reunions happen on the street. That's about the people, and this probably happens across the city in different ways. Whether
Absolutely.
it's Eastern Parkway in Brooklyn, on Labor Day, and who knows what else. But we have to put it on.
Right.
The merchants have to pay for it out of their pockets.
Absolutely, I
The
know.
bid puts what it can in, but we could probably do 5 events like that a year if we had support for it.
And if it was integrated into the citywide marketing campaign, the citywide, that's the thing, is we've got to get connected to the citywide, activations and campaigns.
Well, let me jump in on that point, but actually maybe to ask a slightly different question, because I love the 5-borough focus of this conversation. That's always been our mantra at the Center for an Urban Future. But the reality is we're looking at a prolonged downturn in tourism that's having a huge impact in Midtown. And in the middle of Manhattan, and not just because of tourism, but obviously linked to the fact that fewer than half of New York City's office workers are in the office on any given day. And that may change, but also it seems like by most accounts, some form of hybrid work is here to stay. Now, I don't want to make this conversation about what we do about the office, but I do want to ask you all about what to do about Midtown and really the connection there to business travel. I think we've seen that in normal years, in the past, business travel is about 20% of all visitation to New York. Right now it's down at something like 10 or 12%. That's a big drop, and obviously those travelers spend. But they may not be the visitors that are seeing this beautiful, spreading, dispersed impact across all 5 boroughs. However, they're having a huge impact, or their absence is having a huge impact in the city, and in particular in the middle of Manhattan. So I guess my question is, what do we think the city needs to do next around business travel? Is there a future for bringing business travel back to the pre-pandemic levels, but also thinking about some of the spillover effects on programming at the Javits Center, on conventions and trade shows and conferences? What is the outlook for those types of visitors, and what should the city be doing now to accelerate the recovery of that key segment of the travel market?
I mean, Midtown is the pumping heart of the rest of the city.
Yes.
And whether you like it or not, that's the truth. And there is always going to be a hub and a center. And people's perception is going to be their reality. And if they don't always have to travel into the city, if they are traveling into the city, they're staying in the city, what is that user experience going to be like? And you want to make sure that the experience they leave with and they're telling people about is a positive one. And again, it's that balancing, talking about cleanliness. Our garbage cans, being cleaned up. They're not dumped over the street. Someone's not knocking it over. When you're walking down the street, are you walking under block after block of scaffolding and the unhoused? And is there people with mental illness? You see a lot of that right now. And I think as more people come into Midtown, you start to see less because it blends in. But this is the people's experience. I mean, I am constantly asking people like, oh, what's your perception? I mean, I'm on the train and the bus and in Midtown almost every single day. And it has unique problems. But I also don't think it's as bad as people are saying it is. But everyone I talk to, all they say is, I'm really concerned about the crime. All of this. That, again, is the narrative. So I think we have an opportunity. If people aren't going to go back to the office 5 days a week, how do we repurpose stuff? I mean, nightlife. Look at cities like Berlin, Amsterdam, and other places, what they've done with their nightlife. We always talk about, there's challenges, especially in New York City, because you have commercial and you have residential essentially on top of each other. Imagine taking over a couple floors of like an empty or a limited, an office building that has, limited office workers and turning it into a 2 or 3 story nightclub. Imagine when we talk about urban farming, having like urban farms in Midtown, things that are really unique, that they're interesting, that create a vibe and create other types of energies around that area that people are going to go back to wherever they were from and say, wow, we were just in New York City for this business trip, and you have to see what they're doing in Midtown. It is so much different than it was the last time I was there 4 years ago before the pandemic or whatnot. And I think that's important. But it takes leadership, and I think what Peter was saying too. It takes the leaders. When a governor, when a mayor, when leaders say something has to get done, it becomes a priority and it's marching orders. And that's what it takes. We need marching orders to rebuild Midtown, to support the communities throughout the 5 boroughs. And without that, we're just going to continue to have these conversations about how do we get money. But when there's a priority from the top, things get done.
Yeah, I agree. 100%. I avoid Midtown at all costs. I'm born and raised in New York, born and raised from the Bronx, and if I don't have to go to Midtown, I don't go to Midtown, especially now, right? And like you said.
But going to a club, I mean, imagine New Yorkers always joke around, like, it's like, like Times Square, like New Yorkers don't go to Times Square, but like Times Square is like a fascinating, interesting place.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
if you could bring New Yorkers, and there's a couple of clubs that have opened up, like bring New Yorkers into Times Square, I think that like that's also an exciting thing. Like, it's also how we couch and present these types of questions. They're so often done in like a negative context, but how do we get really excited about the opportunity that these challenges present us?
Yeah, well, right. That's exactly what I was going to get into, and it has even the point now where, like you were saying earlier, and like I think everyone mentioned, cleanliness, safety, quality of life for New Yorkers, and you create a positive experience for New Yorkers. Then when people come here, and the new clubs are open, new restaurants are open, they have a strong positive experience they share. Because word of mouth is as much money we could put into marketing and all that other stuff. It's word of mouth. It's social media.
I was gonna say
It's
social media.
That's what the news is. I had a conversation with my mother yesterday about the news. She was like, "Didn't you see the news yesterday?" I was like, "No, I don't watch the news, right? If anything, I see it on my feed. I see it on my Facebook. I see it in whatever curated news Google has determined that I'm into, right? And they're usually pretty right. And so I think that, it goes back to safe streets, clean streets, money for mental health services, money for homeless services. Like, there's a lot that needs to be done to pull New York out of this pandemic that we're now slowly emerging out of.
Well, Tim, I know you know a thing or two about Times Square, but I think, I wanted to ask you a little bit about, this point about Midtown. Maybe we can start there, and then I've got something kind of related. But
Yeah, so there's 2 categories of tourists who spend far more than everybody else. It's international tourists and business tourists, and it's really Fred started in the business of within NYC Company on meetings and conventions, and it's nobody's better at it in the country or perhaps the world than him, and it's a critical part of New York City's strategy to come back. I do believe that business meetings are going to come back. People like to gather, both for the social purposes. That's got to come back. We've New York has always been aware that like Javits is expensive and not always super competitive. And also the other thing is people want more interesting experiences, and so there could be opportunities to create clusters that expand and diversify the meeting and convention spaces, like possibly using some vacant office floor spaces to create more convening rooms, just like they did in 4 Times Square, the Durst building where NASDAQ is, where they created a space that's good for meetings for people in the business like NASDAQ and TikTok, but also you can rent it out. And if you had a cluster of those in certain neighborhoods that are transit accessible, whether it's downtown Brooklyn or Times Square or Midtown, that's a way to expand our capacity to have a diversified offering and diversified price points for that meeting and convention business, which is so critical. And and the other thing is what's that experience? International tourists have a higher expectation of public spaces because they've got any piazza in Europe, and you see why. But also it's just that they talk about the last mile in Amazon delivery. It's like the last 500 feet. Had a flight from United, it was really good, flew into Newark. That the path, and God bless the Port Authorities and the Port Authority and MTA's sclerotic souls. It's been improving. And some things have been improving. And like the experience of like trying to get a cab is better. But I took New Jersey Transit, and that walk from the platform of New Jersey Transit to the ACE platforms is confusing, miserable, and disgusting. Spend $20 billion on, moving Madison Square Garden 30 feet, fine. But spend $1,000 a day, hire 5 people that are New Yorkers who were born in a foreign country, who speak, some language other than English as their first language, have them be ambassadors, welcoming people, saying, here's how you figure out which platform to get on in the ACE, and where do you want to go?
With the Super Bowl, remember they had greeters and people out there. It's hospitality. The convention stuff, just think about it. I know the state had a program trying to bring conventions here. I'm working trying to bring a nightlife convention to the city. The challenge is everything is so expensive. And, yes, affordable space would be brilliant. But in the meantime, if there is a way to connect sponsors that would sponsor these smaller conventions to be able to come to New York City just to cover some of the costs of the convention space, the food. I mean, the cost per person to take out space and have food, it's a lot. And it's not a big established convention. It's very difficult to get them here. So if there's a way to try to get some of these smaller meetings that are happening around the country to come to New York City, they will eventually, if successful, be able to grow into New York City, be able to sustain the expenses associated with doing an event like that in New York City. But we need to get them here first, because people will have an amazing experience like they can't have in other cities. You go to another city for a convention, there's like one downtown area that you go to, you check it out, that's awesome, that was fun, nice culture. New York, you come for a 3-day, conference, you can go to so many different neighborhoods, and if you're supporting the programs that Peter and Nicole are talking about, then you're going to have an experience that people are going to want to come back next year to host it, because there's so much more for them to see.
Just thinking about the sort of sales pitch to bring business travelers back, we do have a New York City Partnership that has some of the biggest corporations in the globe as members, and they do business with a lot of people, and they do, it's all by Zoom now, but maybe if NYC partnered with the New York City Partnership, you can get some of those companies to start to lean on their partners to send their people here. I don't want to see them on a Zoom. They have real clout, and there are, I think, 400 companies that are represented in the partnership. So just, I think there's lots of ways to try and inspire people to send their people to New York City for business. And we certainly have the ammunition to do it in the major corporations that are here.
Well, on that note, let me ask a little more about what else is within the power of city and state government to do, but maybe beyond marketing and promotions. And I want to talk more about ways of strengthening New York City and Company as well, as Tim alluded to. But thinking about these other levers, the city's Economic Development Corporation, the state's ESD, other parts of government, maybe it's Department of Transportation having to do with streets, maybe it's sanitation. Where are some of these other levers that need to be applied to the tourism recovery? And I'm thinking in part about things like, the city announced efforts to get the DNC here. Obviously, there's maybe a little further out the prospect of bringing the World Cup to New York. But what else is on, in a similar vein, either, major new opportunities that could come to New York, or investments in the infrastructure that's needed to even make those kinds of things possible in the first place? Outside of the realm of marketing New York City, but what are some of those other levers that you'd like to see applied to accelerating a tourism recovery, or building the infrastructure for a more sustainable tourism sector in the future?
So when I think about that question, I don't think of big things. I think there's a lot of little things that the city agencies are responsible for that don't always advance tourism or the ability to host tours. And things that either bids or community organizations want to do, that the city makes it really hard to do. And I'll just give you one example. We do holiday lights, beautiful holiday lights along Arthur Avenue and 187th Street with a really beautiful welcoming sign, welcome to Little Italy. So we just wanted to keep it up for the whole year. You have to take it down after 3 months. That's the law. That's the rule. I don't know why, but that's the rule. We petitioned DOT to do it, and they just said no. There wasn't even a healthy rationale behind it. And I worked long enough in government to know when there's a real reason to do it and when there isn't. It's little stuff like that that creates an experience for people. And we were willing to do it, pay for it, secure it, have a contract to maintain it, whatever they wanted. But there was just no positive response. And I bet that happens an awful lot in an awful lot of places, an awful lot of times. And again, I spent 15 years in government, 10 of them in City Hall. I know what can and can't be done and how to get to yes if you want to. That's leadership. That has to come from the top. I want to support anything and everything that bids, community organizations, that advances tourism and business in this town. I mean, that was Mike Bloomberg's mantra, so I feel lucky to have worked for him. I'm not sure it was the mantra of the last administration, quite frankly.
It wasn't.
Yeah, I'm trying to be polite and respectful.
It wasn't.
But it was pretty. I think it's pretty clear to everybody it wasn't. I think this mayor wants it, and now they have to do it.
And there's some encouraging signs. He's talked about creating a working group to deal with a lot of the silos of different agencies that deal with a lot of these public realm management problems, which has to do with the user experience, and also has to do with empowering neighborhood groups to express themselves culturally through dining and activation and other things. And they've talked about having some kind of Czar dealing with public realm issues. So it's like that's one piece that's wonky and complicated, but is really critical to some longer term structural solutions.
Well, it's breaking the permanent bureaucracy. There are a lot of entrenched interests, and not even just interests, just the way things have been done for so long that people don't always want to be pushed hard outside of their comfort zone. And no matter what you do, 1 million people are going to have 10 million different ideas and opinions about it, and to do little things. It's like when community boards are outsourcing things to the block association, and you don't even know necessarily who the block association is representing. And trying to coordinate everything is very, very challenging. And it goes back to, in specific areas, if you don't have the know-how, if you don't have the expertise, if you don't have the bandwidth to navigate this bureaucracy, it becomes even more difficult to get anything done. And I think that's why, with leadership and having a mandate to break through that bureaucracy, to do big things and the small things, because sometimes the small things like the lights has a meaningful impact on communities, on the people who live there and the people who visit there, but it's just a no. And then even if you know how to try to navigate it, it's still a no. So, I think you just need good people in government, and I think you need other community leaders to constantly push. It's like the pressure on the outside pushing the internal government structures to do big things and to even make little changes that have big changes in people's communities and their lives.
I think also, just speaking to this, it's the burden at the local level that is placed on these organizations, the hoops that we have to jump through to, one, even try to get the permits or the permissions to do the programming. I'm sure you can relate to the grant funding for the few pennies that were given to do something, the level of reporting and processes in order to even get the funding, maintain the funding, report on the funding. You spend so much of your time doing that you don't have time to work on the actual program that you got the funding for. I would love, actually, at the city and state level, if there was more inclusion of the actual people, boots on the ground, that are doing the work, so that we can actually provide that input as to, you want to build infrastructure to support all of this, let us help you. Let me help you. Because we can actually come to us. There's a lot, I know from my perspective and many of my peer organizations, we often talk about the fact that these choices and decisions are made on our behalf, but no one asked us the question as to what we actually need in order to be able to navigate and produce, right? And so, in my opinion, there just needs to be more representation, a seat at the table at the very early stages of the development of these initiatives that are supposed to support and us at this level. I'm always asking the question, well, who actually helped design this, right? And you might have some figureheads that they feel represent these communities. But I can tell you it's not the folks boots on the ground doing it. It's really not.
That's, and it speaks to policy by ideology, and I believe that it's really hard to get, particularly some of the city agencies, to think that one size doesn't fit all.
Exactly.
Midtown is not Little Italy in the Bronx.
Exactly.
It's nothing like it. We can't exist without Midtown. I couldn't agree more. But they're two different worlds. And where bike lanes get put, where city bikes get put, what streets get closed or not closed. Nobody knows that better than the people who have lived there, worked there and have business there for 104 years. I'm sorry, that may sound a little obnoxious, but I know every inch of that neighborhood and all of its characters and all of its character. So why wouldn't you ask me?
Right.
And we have run into, having been asked, having things done anyway, despite our objections, protestations, and explanations. So if that doesn't change, all the money in the world isn't going to help.
And I want to say, I think it's one thing I completely 100% agree that, the community itself, the people on the ground need to be involved in these decisions and these committees, but how do they become involved? Because more often than not, it's someone knows someone who has been in business for 10 years, has gotten a decent amount of press, and hey, let's get that guy in. It'll look good in, on the news tomorrow, which my mother watches, to talk about local businesses being involved in this decision-making process, whether or not they're actually involved in the decision-making process. And so I think that's, I don't know if that means there's a way for small businesses to apply to be members of this committee. I don't know if that means every city agency needs a committee formed of community members, but something where they can become involved. And then again, most recently we were helping someone set up an LLC, and we've worked very closely with Small Business Services, and they've done a tremendous job over the past couple of months, especially through the pandemic, trying to help businesses get money they need, apply for PPP, et cetera, et cetera. But there's still obstacles in the sense that a lot of folks are, have limited English proficiency, and so the websites aren't always written at a level that everyone can understand or translated correctly. And I know I actually worked in city government under Bloomberg as well, and I know that at one point when I was working, not to give you my whole history, but I worked at the Department of Youth and Community Development, and part of our job was gathering information from city agencies to present to youth and families. And it was tremendously difficult to get agencies to share this information with me or to share accurate information that didn't change in the next 2 weeks or 3 weeks or a month. And that hasn't changed too much. And so I think, something that's easily accessible, 311 works when they don't transfer you 100 times, to find where you need to go, or, try to push you off onto another agency. But something that's really easily accessible, and something that small business owners can apply to feel like they're actually contributing to decisions being made around their businesses and their well-being.
Well, I want to move the conversation back to some of the bigger kind of structural challenges for this tourism recovery. And one of them that Tim alluded to right at the beginning is strengthening or supporting New York City and Company. We have this world-class destination marketing agency. We're lucky to have them. But their ability to do what they do is constrained by funding. It's subject to the wishes or desires of various administrations. In a report that we actually published with Times Square Alliance a few years ago, among other things, we found that while New York City Company appears relatively well funded if you just look at the bottom line, the reality is that for a city of 8.5 million people with 66 million visitors, it receives significantly less funding per visitor and or per capita, however you slice and dice it, than so many other major markets, whether it's tourist-centric places like Orlando or Las Vegas or international destinations like Singapore. And when you look at it in that context, we're actually seeing that, our own destination marketing agency is getting a fraction of the funding that these other cities do. That's only obviously one piece of this. So I'd love to spend just a few minutes on, we're lucky to have them, but what should city leaders do to strengthen and expand the impact of NYC and Company?
Any destination worth its salt has an index where they get revenues that are linked to the hotel tax revenues. And this is not about new taxes. New York City has taxes and hotels have taxes that other jurisdictions haven't even thought of. But what has happened in the early 2000s, there was one big jump from $12 million to $20 million a year to NYC and Company's budget. The collective hotel taxes that grew from the early 2000s to 2018, hundreds of millions of dollars. So, and and a lot of that money has been lost right now with the drop in tourism. So we made a proposal, a few years ago, which was establish a baseline now, no new taxes, but say whatever we're getting now in terms of these hotel taxes, draw a line there, and then any dollar that comes in above that, have 50% go to the general fund and 50% to NYC and Company, so that, and have that go on in perpetuity, because you spend more money to make more money. This is free money for New York City's economy, and we are heading into a really tough time over the next few years. The other thing is, Airbnb, had some missteps early on. There were people who were warehousing apartments and they weren't sharing data. But Airbnb has a role in creating neighborhood-based tourism, and there are many jurisdictions that say, "Hey, look, you can have a tax on Airbnb. You can there's now much better enforcement of abuses by Airbnb folks that are not real small owners." So we need to look at that. That's one place where a new tax would, everything else is just like capture what we're already getting, set the baseline right now, have half of it go to the general fund and half to the city, and we'll get tourism isn't supposed to recover until 2025. Maybe it'll recover by 2024 because we're promoting it more aggressively.
I would also say beyond money, the becoming a city agency hamstrings independence. Hiring, firing, salary, compensation. What happens when the city makes a decision that is not good for tourism and actually hurts tourism? Can NYC and Company speak out against the mayor, against the city hall, against whomever? I think it hamstrings, and to get to real independence through a piece of that hotel tax would be, to me, a wonderful thing. And I think it was independent once. Got money from the city, but also got money from hospitality industry.
It still does, but it's a smaller proportion. But it's a legitimate point. It's very hard for them to criticize the hand that feeds them.
The zoning issues, all sorts of things become. It just makes it harder for Fred to do his job, quite frankly. And they have a very simple and very core mission. So sometimes their intention, and it's hard to buck City Hall when you're that dependent. And so, thinking about it from a political angle, I'd love to see them get enough funding.
Guaranteed funding.
Guaranteed funding.
Then you don't have to beg for the next
That's correct.
meal.
Ask Fred what he needs and give it to him, basically.
Well, stay tuned in just a few minutes.
But it's a political issue, and it cuts both ways. If you are an organization and you rely on funding from government, you are walking a political tightrope. But it is also a political issue in the sense that there are sectors, and this sector, and I say hospitality, tourism, is not as politically aggressive as they should be because they are concerned. There's also a lot of concern among larger corporations that they put themselves in a dicey place in the public eye and the political eye if they get too aggressive one way or the other. But it's a political issue because if this sector was to help get people elected on campaign promises to support tourism, to support local community groups that are going to be activating the community, to support small businesses, you are going to get that funding. And if those people in government want to turn around because, and take away funding because they don't like what you're saying about them, well, if you have the political strength to keep fighting back over time, you will get that support. And it's like everything else. Whoever is the loudest, whoever is fighting harder, whoever is the most organized, over the long term, we'll end up getting more. And I think, again, outside of just the playing nice and talking about policies that everyone can cheer about, how do we really hold people's feet to the fire and put strong political pressure on them, saying you need to fund these types of organizations, these types of community groups, and empower them to activate their communities in a way that's authentic and a way that's going to be effective and beloved. And then over time, it becomes part of the annual funding. It becomes part of course I need to be supporting this. It's like not even a second thought. I mean, amazing. And I remember some of these calls we've done, and you have to like explain to people why tourism is so important. You have to explain to them all of these things. We need people that instinctually get it because they come from that world. And there are too few people in government at all levels that have small business experience, that have tourism experience, and that's not a knock to people. It's just we need other people to grow through the ranks and be placed in power in these different areas of government. It can be at agencies, but it also needs to be an elected office.
Let me ask, go ahead, Anthony.
I don't know how much leeway NYC Company has in criticizing government, but I do know Fred's really good at making criticism sound like a compliment.
It's that Southern talent.
It is.
Bless your heart.
But I also think that, so quick show of hands, how many people have been to NYC Company's website recently? I wanted everyone to raise their hand in the room, right? And I think part of it is marketing NYC Company itself. And I think they do very well internationally. We've done videos with them recently. And people that come to visit the bar or meet us always say, they're always international, and they always say, I saw this video when I visited NYC Company's website. They've been doing a tremendous job with like cultural experiences. They have the black and brown experience. They have an Asian experience. They have LGBTQIA plus experience. So they're doing a great job putting all these together. But New Yorkers themselves don't necessarily know what NYC Company is. They think it's a clothing store for women, right? Because it is. Right? When the mayor's speaking, when government officials are speaking, I think it's important that they also mention NYC Company, to say that by cleaning our streets, by providing more mental health services, that gives NYC Company even more fuel to advertise how safe and clean and awesome New York City streets are.
That's great. I really appreciate that. Well, let me ask one last question. Take the moderator's prerogative to do that, although we do want to turn it over to our audience as well. But, Tim mentioned earlier the experience of, walking in a piazza in Italy, for example. And, Nicole, you talked about what's happening in Ghana, building a major new cultural experience there. I'm curious for everyone on the panel, what's one thing that you've seen in another city that you think, we know that we all feel that New York is the center of the universe, and it is. But we don't have it all right, and we haven't, tried everything under the sun. And I'm curious, what's one thing I think you all are worldly folks. What's one thing you've seen in another city or another country that you think that's actually something New York could adapt or adopt or do better when it comes to the tourism experience?
I think enjoying the public space for long periods of time, kind of the piazza, you think about sitting out, in Italy somewhere, having espresso, the length of time it takes to have a meal. Sometimes as a New Yorker, you get frustrated because you're like, oh, I'm ready to go. Like, where's the check? I need to go. But there's something really magical about just being able to sit in your environment, enjoy a great meal, enjoy the people that are walking by, and just enjoy it. Here, even the visitors, everyone's so quick. There's so much going on. And I think you want that, but I think by continuing to build out the public space like they do in many places in Europe, people have more of an opportunity to just sit and enjoy the area around them. And I think we should further invest in these types of open spaces. And I think it needs to be done in a way that Peter hinted at or was very direct about, that it needs to be done with insight and feedback from those local communities, so people again feel that authentic feel. So I would just say getting people to actually stay still in a place for a little time and just enjoy everything that's going around them instead of feeling that they constantly need to move from place to place.
I'd say just New Orleans Jazz Festival, there's a Newport Jazz Festival, a Montreal Jazz Festival. You know, how is it New York City doesn't have a jazz festival? I mean, we have jazz and we have like the Blue Note Jazz Festival, but to really connect the dots and do it on a shoulder season when it's not peak time, just like Broadway does with their promotions in September and January. You know, Adelaide, Australia has 10 arts and cultural festivals a year. So those are the examples where like there are these very demand drivers at compression events, tapping into authentic assets, but not just having a list on a website and slapping a logo on it. It's having real money to support that content and then driving the marketing around it.
I would say dropping the big Ferris wheel in the middle of London was something that I thought was pretty great and just so counterintuitive as to be a really interesting thing in the middle of a city. And I'm not suggesting we put one in Times Square, but something big like that, you know, just captures people's imagination on why the hell would you do that? But when you get there and you go see it, it just is, I mean, it's quite impressive.
When you, to speak to the cultural festivals that you mentioned that happen around the world, I mean, that in large part is why with the Harlem Festival of Culture, one of the reasons when we saw the phenomenon that the movie Summer of Soul worldwide, and also just that festival 50 years ago, what it had done, that was sort of the catalyst for our forming the team to bring that festival back. And what's been really interesting is we've met with the mayor, the mayor's office and with the borough president's office to talk about a level of support for that, because we do very much see this as an attraction that will bring visitors from around the country and certainly from around the world as well. But what I'm excited about is that the city is seeing that as well. We've gotten the full support of the mayor's office and of the borough president's office. The borough president actually at a recent event said this could be one of the most significant cultural events in New York City in 2023. Now that was powerful to me to say that. I'm hoping that's backed up with some dollars, but that's what he said. And so from my perspective, when you think about these kind of things happening around the world, which is something that's more commonplace, I think we need to bring those kind of attractions back. But the other thing too that I think, particularly with the millennial audience, I believe, we can't underestimate the importance of social media. A lot of choices are being made. There's so much content that's being shared of people enjoying their tourist experiences, that is how people are deciding where they want to go, right? And so when you really look at the opportunity from a digital landscape to really start to promote the experiences that we have here in New York City and creating campaigns that really, and not just influencers, real people that are actually enjoying all that New York City has to offer and allowing that to go viral, maybe that can help combat some of the other videos that show the garbage on the street, or our friendly four-legged critters that people love to post videos of running around New York City. But if you see some, cats, right? Let's call them cats. But when I see videos of people around the world in the most exotic locations, and everyone is posting content of themselves having these amazing experiences, we've got that right here. And so leveraging the digital landscape to do that as well with real people, encouraging people in New York City to post videos of themselves having the best time of their lives in New York City. Like, we've got it all here. We just, like you said, connect the dots and help people understand how they can join in the effort of marketing New York City. We're the best marketers of it, right? We love New York City, and we're living and breathing it every day, but we're not being leveraged in that way to really kind of connect to the larger messaging, right?
And let's go beyond encouraging and actually paying them. We had an idea about a WPA style pay, sort of create digital and video creators to create content, tens of thousands of them. Government is terrible at doing small grants, so get an intermediary to do it, to produce exactly that kind of content with some strategy about how it fits into NYC and Company's larger messaging and which assets you want to celebrate.
Let's convert some of these buildings in Midtown, like the largest adventure park. I'm just thinking about this as I talk. With, Dubai, the indoor skiing, the largest water
Not
parks.
in Times Square, please.
Not in Times Square. But people go, I have a daughter who's 7 years old. be 7 years old. You know, we're trying to think of places where we can go and do entertaining. So like we're going to be going to Maine, then you got to stop in Boston. You want to go to a water park. You want to go to these places. These are the things that people post about. These are the stories. I mean, if you could think about the things that you could do in buildings in Midtown Manhattan, in Lower Manhattan, that are not just office space. I mean, it's pretty remarkable, and it's things that people would go and they would see. And I know there'd be opposition. People like, we don't want this here. But these are things that change the dynamic. They attract people here. They are perfect for social media, and they're also like family friendly. New York City is a very difficult place to come visit, especially if you have multiple kids that want to do different things. They want to eat different things. We have to schlep to this place to go do that. So if you can have things like you have other places where you go and there is inclusive, gives them the opportunity to go there, but then also go to the different neighborhoods and experience some more authentic stuff. You know,
That's great. You know, I want to actually, I have to jump in only because I want to make sure we get time for some of the questions from our amazing audience, as well as the folks that are tuned in online.
Can I give my favorite tourism quickly? I would like to take something from our national parks, which is whatever you take in, you leave with, right? And I feel like promoting responsible tourism is also a big deal. I'm going to use the Joker stairs in the Bronx. So if you've all seen the Joker, he dances on the stairs, right? Before he has his nervous breakdown or while he has it. And that became a big tourist destination, right? A lot of folks wanted to go to the Joker stairs and take pictures of themselves dancing on the stairs. But they weren't respectful of people living in those communities who were using and walking up and down those 131 stairs every day to go to and from work. And it created a lot of animosity, you know, where it could have been a great opportunity to promote local businesses and things to do in that area. It became, you know, someone showing up for their Instagram and, you know, dodging eggs because they were throwing eggs, right? So I think we're promoting responsible tourism and not putting the onus just on business owners and communities, putting it on tourists as well when they come and visit our communities, that, you know, people live here, people are building lives here and have families here. And, you know, yes, come, enjoy, spend money, hang out with us, but also be respectful of who we are.
I was going to make a why so serious joke, Anthony. But
Go for it.
No, I'm restraining myself. No, I really appreciate those points. So let me turn it over to our audience here in the room, but also just a reminder of so many folks watching online. If you tweet at NYC Future, you can send in your questions there. Why don't we start with Adrian in the front, and then I'll check out folks who are asking questions online. Just please say your name, you know, who you're here with, and feel free to ask your question.
Hi, Adrian Benepe with Brooklyn Botanic Garden. Just building on some great ideas here. You know, I just got back from Portland, Oregon. I attended a conference, 700 people. It brought downtown Portland back to life. I think we need to have mini convention centers like in each borough. And so you can get away. That convention will never come to New York because it's too expensive, but it would come if they could pay half the price, as you say, Andrew. 2 many cultural centers in each borough, not 1 but 5, right? So Washington Heights, Harlem, St. George, like really build up. We're working on one for the heart of Brooklyn, for Brooklyn Botanic Garden, Brooklyn Museum, with EDC, sort of an Eastern Parkway cultural district. 3, we got to have better bike access. Look at Paris. They've converted entire boulevards and highways to bike access. If they can do it there, we can do it here. You can't ride a bike from Brooklyn Bridge to Prospect Park. It's too goddamn dangerous. You get killed just trying to cross Atlantic Avenue. And 3, the streetscape. Why should sidewalks be covered with garbage bags? Why should there be vendors and news boxes taking away precious public space from pedestrians? Put that on the curb, right? Move the garbage bag collection to big boxes, again, like they have in Paris. New York City is stuck in 1950 in terms of streetscape and public services. And you look at what's going on in Amsterdam and Copenhagen and Basel and Paris. They're way ahead of us in terms of the public realm. If we make the public realm pleasant instead of disgusting, more people will come here. My points.
Thanks.
Those are the rats
One question from online, and then we'll go back to the room. The question is, at the end of 2021, the city council passed a zoning amendment that the mayor approved, making it much more difficult to build new hotels without special permits. Is that a problem? Do we have an issue coming down the pike with a supply of hotel rooms because of that legislation?
We should only hope so. That's completely short-sighted, in my opinion.
I think I don't know all the specifics about that, but I think in general there's a regulatory and straitjacket on a lot of the organic entrepreneurial energy in New York City. In big ways and small ways, zoning is definitely part of that. And imagine if, like, as part of a neighborhood initiative, you were encouraging entrepreneurial activity. And I'll just give the example of they said to restaurants during the pandemic, you can go and put something up on the curb. And in 2 weeks, there was this unbelievable explosion of entrepreneurial investment and energy and creativity, some of which wasn't great, but it was absolutely unbelievable when you just said, go do it. Now you got to figure out how to, create a system, regulatory system around it. But that for me is a metaphor for the danger of these really restrictive land use policies, and it seems to me that that's probably one of them.
I think that's also a political issue, right? We will see this will give the city a lot more leverage over anyone that wants to develop and operate a hotel. And there'll have to be a determination made whether it is worth going through that entire process to develop and operate a hotel. And I think there is a chance that, there's going to be issues in the future. But like Peter said, we should only be so lucky to get to that point. But I think eventually we will, and that's going to be a conversation that's going to have to be had.
All right, thanks. I'm aware that I'm facing this way, so I'm going to go back behind me so I don't miss out on folks behind me, and then we'll go back to the front row here.
Hi. Hi, I'm Majora Carter from the South Bronx. And thank you. And I'm also the owner of the Boogie Down Grind, which is the urban hip-hop themed coffee shop. Actually, important to note, in 2021, we were voted Best Cafe in New York City by Time Out New York. I just want to be clear about that. And also the owner of Bronxlandia, which is an up-and-coming event hall also in Hunts Point in the South Bronx. So, but we're part of a part of New York City where we're not considered like the place where tourism happens. And I really get the feeling that we're sort of forgotten, period. And so how is it that tourism, whether it's because we've gone through the Tourism 101, through NYC Company, but it's like we're not even considered anything. And I mean, believe me, I understand. I love Little Italy and all that stuff. But for those of us who have done the major investment in small businesses within our communities and actually do have followings, and we know we could be killing it if we had just a little more support. So I see you over there in a big way, Nikia. So, but how can New York City understand that we're here? The fabric of the social cohesion, the viability, the vitality that we're bringing to our own communities could be something that we could share more of. How can you support us in ways that I feel like we're not being supported at all?
I mean, listen, preach on it, because I know what you're saying. And the point that I made earlier, connecting the dots to the city level branding strategy, marketing strategy, the campaigns, all of that, because the issue that you're facing is the onus is put on the businesses and the community organizations to figure out how to elevate their profile enough to get on a worldwide stage. We don't have the capacity or the resources to do that, certainly not consistently, and certainly not with the time frame that's needed. Again, you have to understand the cycle of tourism, right? These tours, a lot of times, they're booked out 6 months, 12 months. That tour operator is creating an itinerary for a group of 100 6 months ago. So the marketing that you're doing for your business this week for an event you're doing this weekend, forget about it. There's no way for them. So that's part of it too, is just understanding that we're strapped. And how do you connect it to like the larger marketing campaign, working more closely with NYC and Company and really being integrated into the overall messaging. I mean, I think that's a big part of it, because a lot of the onus is on us at the local level to figure it out, even if you've gone through the training, which has been wonderful. So we know how to do the travel vouchers now, and we know how to, all of the work that's been done with the Tourism Ready program, that we've done that. But that still doesn't help me get the message out to someone in Tokyo that's booking a group of 100 tourists that's coming next summer, right? And that's, I think, with a point that you're
I just want to reinforce that Little Italy is branded now because we actually took scarce bid dollars and hired Nicholas Lentz, a consulting firm, marketing firm, to market us. And we have, it took a lot of time, effort, and energy to do that marketing, particularly social media.
Yeah.
But you get into Eater, there's 9 million followers on Eater, and so it didn't happen because we're Little Italy in the Bronx, but you have to have the dollars. It comes back to
Yeah, and
where are
it's-
the dollars?
Yeah.
And also things like transportation access that's where bike lanes and MTA and really making greater accessibility, and then the kind of individualized grants to support additional assets and attractions and making it easy to go from Little Italy to the Boogie Down Cafe.
And is doing this a priority of your elected leaders in your community? You know, in all their conversations, when the city council is hosting hearings on all of these things, are these issues that are a priority to people that have a bullhorn? And if it's not, how do you and others in your neighborhood change that dynamic so it becomes a priority? Again, you know, there's limited resources, but there's so many resources. And how do you make in your neighborhood what you want an issue of constant conversation among people that will actually make things happen? So I think it starts at the grassroots and then holding people's feet to the fire.
And I just think it's getting super creative with, you know, how you're marketing yourselves at a grassroots level with $0, right? Because when I started the beer hall, it was every morning consistently posting from bed, you know, before I brushed my teeth, posting, you know, about what's happening that day, next week, tomorrow, the week later, creating like a landing page of information where if anyone is a little bit curious about who we are and what we're doing, they'll see it all on one page when they visit there, including a calendar that was planned about 6 months out, you know, and it's sending press releases even though no one calls you back to say I'm interested. Now they call back, right? But back then no one cared. And it was a lot of, we couldn't afford to pay for it, so we were doing it ourselves, and it was just a lot of grassroots, like flyering and outreach.
Yeah. Eater, Grub Street, all, you know, they're starting to go into more communities and doing all of these lists and everything. People travel for food. People travel to drink. People travel to socialize. So I think it is these more localized lists. So it becomes an area where people think, okay, I'm going to this spot, then I'm going to that spot.
Right.
I gotta say, I think at this point, you know, maybe everyone in the room is gonna be headed up to the Bronx after this.
I love it.
You know, the
I
beer
love it.
hall and Arthur Avenue and going to the Boogie Down Grind. But that is all the time we have for this first panel. I'm so sorry to everyone in the room who didn't get a chance to ask your questions. Obviously, please stick around afterwards, and folks, I'm sure will be happy to talk. But I'm sorry, we have to move on to the next part of our event. But please join me in a round of applause for our amazing panelists. Thank you all so much. And stay tuned, stay right here. You know, in just a couple moments, we'll be joined again for the second part of our event. Thank you all so much.
Good morning again, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here today. Can we just have another round of applause for that great panel? I am Josh Vlasto with Airbnb. I'm subbing in for Kelly Fay. On behalf of Airbnb, it is a thrill to be able to sponsor this event and participate in such an important discussion about tourism. I will say to the panelists and the host, that I have now a laundry list of things to take back to the headquarters of great ideas, not only for local partnerships as well, but broader partnerships. That was a fabulous discussion. The last several years, as we've discussed, has been challenging for New York's residents, small businesses, and the local economy. That's why we're thrilled to be able to support this discussion about the importance of the return of New York City's tourism sector, really one of the most critical economic drivers of the city. Recently, as we've all seen, the rebound is on the move. The city is truly starting to come alive. Last month, Broadway attendance and ticket sales returned to pre-pandemic levels. Hotel booking rates were at 95%. And recently on our platform, New York was one of the top trending destinations in the United States. We agree with Mayor Adams. New York is back, and all of us in this room, I know, are committed to building on that momentum. Airbnb is proud to be a part of this sector in New York City. Pre-pandemic, Airbnb guests spent $2.2 billion in New York City, supporting more than 17,000 jobs across retail, restaurants, transportation, and a variety of other ancillary sectors. Hosting is an important lifeline for those who need to make ends meet during these difficult times. Our hosts are eager once again to welcome visitors from all around the world to the communities in all 5 boroughs. According to our latest survey of our host community, Airbnb hosts in New York City are primarily the middle-class families that are anchors in your neighborhoods. 27% work in education, 29% work in healthcare, 7% are first responders, 12% work in arts and entertainment, and 40% of New York City hosts report that they depend on short-term rentals in order to make ends meet. I would also be remiss if I didn't point out that a recent poll by Travel Technology found that 60% of travelers would be less likely to visit a place that restricted or limited short-term rental availability. Just a little plug for us, I suppose. Once again, thank you again for the Center for an Urban Future and to everyone here for making this today. What I am here to do is to introduce the great Fred Dixon, President and CEO of New York City and Company, the city's official destination marketing organization, as everyone knows. Fred joined New York City and Company in 2005 and became CEO in 2014. His pioneering leadership has helped New York City and Company become one of the world's most innovative and successful tourism promotion agencies. Without a doubt, Fred has played a tremendous role in the remarkable growth in the city's tourism economy. On a personal note, there are not a lot of people who are sort of centers of gravity in New York City, one for their various sectors and icons. There's no doubt that Fred is. And when you think of tourism, you think of New York City and Company, you think of Fred. So please join me in welcoming Fred Dixon to the stage and Jonathan back up.
All right. That was an amazing first panel. Great job, Eli, and thanks to all our panelists. And welcome, Fred.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. That was terrific.
It's great to see you. And let me also say that we are going to spend a few more minutes in a little bit with some more opportunity for questions from all of you. So I also want to just echo what Josh said, and I think what Tim said earlier, just you and your colleagues at NYC Company really are the best in the business and have done such a great job. And I know we're going through a lot of a challenge right now. That's what this event is about today, how we can overcome that. But obviously, looking over the past 10, 15, 20 years, the meteoric rise of tourism, it really, as I said earlier, has become one of the 3 or 4 biggest parts of the city's economy. And I think we're kind of here today because we're wondering and would love your input on how we fully recover. We know we've gotten a long way back. In many ways, we've come back faster than a lot of people thought. But we're here and we're kind of we're seeking ideas, and we got some really fantastic ones from the first panel on how we keep it going and make sure we get back to those 2019 levels. And, you know, maybe I could just ask you to start by spending a couple minutes talking a little bit about where are we right now with tourism recovery? And also I'd love to hear a little bit of like what you might have been doing a little differently given the unique situation that we're facing with the pandemic and with a lot of other things too.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And congrats to the panel. That was a terrific dialogue. You actually brought to the fore a lot of the issues that we think about every day and a lot of great solutions. So thank you all for that conversation. We're certainly going to be taking it back. I want to acknowledge my 2 colleagues here with me today, Chris Haywood, our head of global comms, and Donna Karen, our head of global research, both of them indispensable in these dialogues. And then we have a lot of our team that are online watching this morning. So thank you all for your contributions. And it is, you know, tourism is it takes a village, right? I mean, tourism is a team business. And every business in this city that's interested in tourism plays a role. And all the business leaders in the dialogue are essential to advancing and continuing to advance tourism because we cannot do it alone. We've talked about the resources that are available, and I will dig a little bit more into that. But, you know, in terms of where we are overall, and I know Eli quoted some stats, some of those were from earlier in the spring. I'm really happy to tell you the last 7 weeks, 6 of those 7 weeks, we've been back the #1 hotel market in the country. So that is a huge, I think, compliment to everyone in this room. It has taken time to get to that space, but travelers are now beginning to return into New York. It has been a long journey over the last 2 years, and it's certainly taken its toll on many, many of us and our sectors. But visitors are responding to New York, and they're coming from far afield. Part of why that's happened, 1, the weather got better. 2, we got past Omicron. 3, all of us in the industry worked together to convince the White House that it was time to take down that entry requirement for testing. That was a huge impediment to people coming into the United States. So we're beginning to see international travelers return again. We were the last major economy to do that, by the way. Canada had done it way before us. The UK and Europe had done it. And it was really holding us back. So there are a number of factors. Business travel is returning faster than we thought. Conventions are booking in a very short window. but they are coming, and they're coming in strong numbers. We're seeing that play out. So just to give you the snapshot from the week ending June 18th, which is the latest date we have hotel data. We'll get last week's data later today. The city was tracking, we performed 98% of our 2019 benchmark. So in terms of hotel occupancy, it was 98% of where we were for that same week in 2019. Average daily rates were 112% of where they were in 2019. So the hotel community is doing a good job of getting rates up, which is important for their health. It's also important for the tax collections and revenues in the city. So we are trending in a really good direction. We have a lot of reasons to be optimistic for this year. We'll talk about next year in just a second. But there is an enormous amount of pent-up demand. We're sitting on an enormous cushion of pent-up demand, not only domestically, but internationally. People that have not been able to travel, that have been saving for these trips, that had perhaps vouchers or had funds that had been sitting, waiting to be used. A lot of tour operators and airlines hung onto those monies, so they're able to spend those and use those now. And we've seen the way people have prioritized travel in their lives. Travel has become not just something that you did on occasion. It is core very much to the public experience today and the way people travel. They're prioritizing travel over buying a new refrigerator. These are the experiences are the way to go. I mean, you talked about it, Anthony. I mean, I think experiences are what people are craving, and you get that by traveling. There was one of the major travel brands last year had an ad that I thought summed it up perfectly. At the end of your life, will you think about, should I have bought a larger television, or should I have gone to more of those places I dreamed about? And you're not going to think about that television on your deathbed. You're going to think about the places you traveled and the people that you met and the experiences that you had. And so I think that's what speaks to the enormous swell that travel and tourism has experienced around the world. And no place has more opportunities and offers more of those experiences than New York City, and people respond to it. And so I'm really thrilled. The conditions are right. People are coming back into the marketplace. We actually just adjusted our forecast for year end in June. So at our June board meeting, we actually revised the number upward a little bit. So we're expecting in excess of 56 million visitors to return this year. That's 85% of where we were in 2019. And remember, the 2019 record number took 10 years to get there, right? So we're trying to rebuild in 2 years what took 10 years to build. But we're going to get there, and we're very confident. There are a lot of headwinds out in the marketplace. Convention travel is returning faster. The airlines are all reporting business travel is returning faster, which is terrific, and we need that. And those stats I touched on for 2 weeks ago in the hotel community, midweek occupancy was higher than the weekend. So Tuesday and Wednesday night was 90% occupancy. And so what that tells us is business travelers are coming back. International travelers are coming back. It's no longer that trend of weekend domestic getaways. So it takes a blend of all of that. One of the beauties of New York tourism is it is a blend. It is an amazing, beautiful blend of travelers that come into New York that make this market so strong. It's individual business, transient travelers, it's group business travelers, it's people coming from the region, coming to enjoy Broadway and theater and the arts and restaurants in all 5 boroughs. And it's Americans bringing their families, bringing their 16-year-olds on that Sweet 16 trip. It's those high school seniors that are coming on their high school trips. New York has the most amazing mix of visitors, and so we have to pull on all of them, make them feel comfortable, show them that the city is safe, ready, and welcoming, that the experiences they love are here, and there are more of them now than ever before, and that they should choose New York. So all of that takes an effort from this community at large. It takes us using the resources we have at NYC Company to tell those tales, both in earned media and paid promotion, but also through the great work that our press team does around the world to drive even more dialogue with social media influencers in the press and with all of you to tell your stories. And I'm really proud to say that it has come a long way in a short amount of time. It will be a busy summer. It will be a busy fall and winter, and then we can talk about next year.
So there was a lot of conversation in the first panel about resources for NYC and Company, and I know you're excited because actually the last year and a half or so, you got more resources thanks to the federal government, and I think Tim alluded to that. Also, Mayor Adams and the City Council recently put some more money to NYC and Company. I guess I wanted to ask, I know that's not the stable funding that a lot of folks in the first panel were referring to, but when you get that kind of infusion, and maybe you can explain a little bit about what exactly you got, like what are you able to do with that more than or differently than you did before?
Yeah, it's a great question. And again, it was about the community coming together. So in the early days of the pandemic, we were fortunate to have the attention of all of the electeds, because for the first time, we realized, oh my God, we have 67 million fewer customers in our city this year. And I was on a call with the Partnership for New York City and some of the major corporate CEOs outside of our sector, right? The CEO of LVMH and luxury brands were on this call. And when I said that, they all, everyone on Zoom is not looking at the camera or paying attention. They all looked up, and it dawned on everyone that, tourists spend, the spending power of the visitors in New York City in 2019 was in excess of $45 billion. That rippled throughout the economy and created, over $80 billion in economic impact. So we saw what it looked like when travelers stopped coming. And we saw the interdependency on jobs and on small businesses in every neighborhood and every community. Whether you worked in Midtown and you took that paycheck back, to a neighborhood in one of the 4 boroughs, or whether you lived in Manhattan, you saw that. So we were fortunate on one of those calls to have the attention of Senator Schumer, and he said, "What are you going to need?" And I was able to speak to him, and I told him, yes, we need this immediate relief. The business community needs immediate relief. The restaurants, the cultural organizations, the arts organizations, PPP, all of that has to happen. It has to happen right now. But we're going to need to start planting seeds if we're going to have anything to harvest when we come out of this. And he said, I like that. Tell me more. So we were able to put forward some proposals to him. I said, as you build back, make sure that tourism marketing is part of this program. It took a couple of rounds of the language and the legislation to get there, but originally organizations like ours were not eligible for PPP, but we were able to get us in that program. So DMOs and tourism boards like ourselves around the country were able to tap into that like private businesses were, which was terrific because we're not a city agency, right? We're a 501c6. So A, that was the first thing, but then B, the ability to have the American Rescue Plan funds used for tourism marketing was not in the original draft. And so we were able to work with Schumer and work with the U.S. Travel Association to get that done. And I'm fortunate, or I'm happy and proud to tell you that New York City, Mayor de Blasio understood it as well because we told him what we needed. And we received $30 million of the American Rescue Plan funding, 10 times more than any other city in the country. So that $30 million immediately went to work last year, creating our campaign and our push and our efforts. It's time for New York City, showing the world that New York City is safe. It's not a ghost town. It is vibrant. It is alive. It's ready and welcoming for you. And come and support our small businesses. Come and support our communities of color. And we were able to get out of the gate before anyone else. And that is what's helped us build that groundwork. And the panel talked about the timeline it takes to get back on the schedule with a lot of these visitors. There are long timelines. And we're now seeing that those trees bear fruit. And so I'm really proud of that. When the new mayor came in January, I met with him between Christmas and January, and he said, what more do you need? And I said, we need to be able to continue that promotion. That this money is winding down because it was a truly global effort. And in this day and age, it takes money. Earned media is terrific and powerful. Social media is terrific and powerful, but there's so much competition out there for people's attention. If you don't have paid media behind your message, you're going to fall down the list. And so he got that immediately, and so he approved out of his budget an additional $10 million coming to us this year with the fiscal 23 budget, so we'll get that July 1. And so that's helping us do great things, keep Restaurant Week free, to make sure that the restaurant sector gets the promotion that they need. In the past, it's always been a cooperative effort. The restaurants pay a little, we put in money, and we run the program. Now, for the second year, we've been able to keep Restaurant Week free for everyone. And this is the 30th anniversary, by the way, of Restaurant Week. So it's going to be a huge year-long celebration of culinary across all 5 boroughs. So huge thanks to the elected leaders in understanding that. But the core issue, which the panel so well laid out, is that our funding, our base funding, our contract remains the same level it was in 2007. So when you adjust it for inflation, we actually have 22% less resources today than we did in 2007. For years, we were on par with Boston, right? Which is very interesting. Boston just passed a new tourism marketing district, and they have now surpassed us in their funding. So Boston has a significantly larger budget than we do, as do the 2 tourism organizations in Philadelphia. We love a challenge. We make what we have work, but we are getting outspent. And you hear the needs of this panel, and it was so beautifully stated, the work that needs to be done in developing tourism product, how we can work more with community, help tell those stories. That takes money.
You know, I was going to ask you a little bit about how we get that stable funding, but I think you've commented on that. I think that the urgency of that to keep it going even beyond this 10 million that the city came up with this year seems important because of all the headwinds you are facing, not just with the pandemic, the fact that China is locked down, that there is a recession coming, that inflation is out there. There's a lot that you're dealing with, and that you're competing with other places that are spending more. So that seems like a given. I don't know if you want to comment on that anymore, but I wanted to ask you about another aspect of the funding part of it that came up a lot in that first panel, which probably isn't something that NYC Company is really the lead on, but it's around supporting communities and neighborhoods to be able to market themselves. And it actually reminded me of something that we did late last year when we did a study about a blueprint with 10 ideas for how to support the city's minority and immigrant-owned businesses, and we did a lot of focus groups around the city, and we really kind of came up with this idea based on what we heard that we ought to be giving even small grants to bids and community-based organizations, merchants association, to help them market themselves, right? It's great that NYC Company is working with marketing, not just in Manhattan, but like, how do we get that kind of resources to communities like Peters and Majora's and Nicoa's? Like, how can that happen, and what's the next step for that to happen? And maybe it's not NYC Company.
Yeah, there's huge power in that. I mean, there are so many authentic stories there and authentic experiences that people want. And we're strapped in terms of our abilities to tell all of those stories, right? So we do everything that we can, obviously. But there is an opportunity out there to look at what other destinations are doing. And I point to one because my old colleague is now the head of the Visit Asheville, North Carolina tourism organization. And they don't have everything right? Like none of us get everything right. But they created through their hotel tax collections and their tourism marketing district a fund that actually is dedicated to developing tourism product in community. And so they're not only going and building physical infrastructure in communities, but they're helping drive initiatives like bike lanes, like promotion of neighborhood programming. So there's funding that is dedicated that the tourism organization actually is able to steer with their board and community engagement that goes from the profits, the benefits of tourism's overall growth to make sure that it is more equitable throughout the entire community. And so there are models out there that cities are doing that are very interesting. And we've been watching what's happening. It's going to require a mind shift here in New York in terms of how we think about funding and how we think about earmarking opportunities. But there are successful models that we could adopt and that we could use to take the work that we're doing with Tourism Ready, for example, in the communities to the next level. Because we're doing the work of engaging the community, of educating them on what's happening in tourism, showing them the opportunities, but not always being able to give them the next level of resource and support that they need. Some of you may know we have a foundation, the NYC Company Foundation, which George Lentz and Christine started. We are in debt to them more than 20 years ago. And we do raise money. We raise private dollars from the business community that we then re-grant in small ways, because it isn't huge dollars, but we're able to do this kind of work in community. We work with the Board of Presidents to identify, particularly arts, in this case, it has to be a nonprofit arts and cultural organization to receive the funding, but making sure that the organizations, not the big boys, but the small organizations and communities are getting support for tourism. So we want to raise more money. It's a difficult environment to do that, as you all know, but we're doing all we can. But there is an opportunity to have a bigger public dialogue about taking the benefits and the proceeds of tourism broadly and reinvesting into the community.
Isn't it also like partly we need a little bit more, I don't know about attention, but involvement, support from some other city agencies? I mean, that came up a little bit earlier, but it strikes me that EDC, Department of Cultural Affairs, SBS, especially when you talk about the neighborhoods, that I think a lot of times people just put too much on NYC Company to do everything, or assume that because you're so good that you're taking care of it. But for this community-based tourism promotion support, it seems like some other agencies could really be really pivotal.
Well, I mean, I want to say that we do have tremendous engagement with all of those agencies. I have to give them their flowers out of the gate. They are terrific in supporting the work that we do. You know, they're resource strapped as well, and it does take you know, a broad vision to be able to advance these agendas. And I think the brain trust that you've assembled here today actually talked about some really brilliant ideas. And I would love to see how we could take this dialogue and advance it. because I think there are opportunities, and it does have to be a priority. The mayor's been incredibly supportive. I can't thank him enough for being a cheerleader for our industry. Anything we've asked him for, he has done. I know he would be open to ideas, and we'd be happy to help carry the water on these conversations.
One of the ideas that came up in the first panel was around the importance of the arts, the possibility of new public art, and other cultural events that might, especially in this time when we're really challenged, when we're not where we are, even despite the positives that you mentioned that are happening right now in the city. Are you thinking about some of those things, or did you like any specific ideas that came up in the first panel? What do we need to be doing with, especially with art, cultural tourism?
Yeah, I think there are two pieces that I took away from that. Well, first of all, in the summer of 2020, we had a great partnership with the Public Art Fund to create art in the 5 boroughs that would give New Yorkers a reason to get out of their home. We knew that one of the strategies in getting the world to see that New York was ready to come back was to show them that New Yorkers are engaging with their own city again, right? Because we weren't leaving our homes. We weren't really leaving our neighborhoods. Restaurants were largely closed. And the museums were closed, right? So how do we begin to weave that back together? And the Public Art Fund, with one phone call, stepped up and said, we want to help you do this. And so we were able to put some money together. We commissioned 50 emerging artists, 10 from each of the boroughs. We used our city bus shelter assets to create a literal outdoor museum in the summer of 2020. Now, not everyone was out and moving about in that summer, but it got terrific engagement. It gave some young emerging artists a terrific platform to showcase their art in a way that was very authentic, and it showed the power of art in bringing people together. And I think that's what you're pointing to. The Gates was a unicorn and a gift in every way. And so George Lentz and others in this room were engaged in a lot of that dialogue. It took 25 years for Christo to make the Gates happen. We don't have 25 years to do that again. And it was immensely controversial in the beginning, as you all remember. Not everyone was on board. And we look back at it now, we remember the incredible pieces of it. And it is, in so many ways, a gift, because it also was held in the winter, right, when we really need more visitation. That's our real opportunity. The more tourism we can bring in January and February in a normal year, the better the overall economy performs. So the Gates was a terrific idea. There have been a lot of conversations about what is the next Gates and how do we get, the waterfalls was one on the Brooklyn Bridge. There's been a few others, but it takes big vision, it takes big funding, and it takes real collaboration between government and community to make those kinds of things happen. The one thing I have said in the conversations that I've been in with government is that there are so many, and it was highlighted in this conversation by the panel, there are so many events happening already in the community that need support. And so we should first look to what's happening already on the ground that is authentic and genuine, and by the way, what visitors want, right, in so many ways, and make sure that we're doing everything we can to support them. So I know the state's doing that in certain ways. The city is doing that as well. We're doing what we can to support local events. I mean, the Let's Get Free Festival is one example. The New York Festival that Lincoln Center is leading is another example. But there are many, many more happening across all 5 boroughs that we need to make sure we're taking care of and elevating first, and then see what other big ideas could come in from the outside, or is there a local idea that could be elevated to the height of the Gates. And put that in place. But right now, especially with arts organizations struggling the way they are, we should really feed and care for them, and make sure we're doing all we can to support them, drive visitors to them, and then see how a big unicorn event could play a role.
All right, we're going to open it up to audience questions, but I've got one more before we do that, and that's it's a big question. Can you give me 2 things that kind of concern you most about kind of the next year or 2 when it comes to fully accelerating the tourism recovery, and also 1 or 2 things that, kind of picking up on that last question from the first panel, that you've seen in other cities around the world or in the U.S. that you'd love to adopt here if we had the resources to do it?
Yeah, I love to dream. That's a great question. So, first of all, what worries me right now? We touched on it just a little bit. You know, we are our own worst critics in the tri-state. And I'll give you an example of that. Chris and I did a European press roadshow earlier in the spring, and it happened to be the week after the subway shooting incident. We were very concerned that it was going to dominate the press engagement, particularly in France and the UK. And so we were prepared for those tough questions. We have to acknowledge that there are problems, that things have happened, but by and large, we are still the safest big city in America. We have to remind ourselves of that over and over, and we have to engage, and we can't pull back. We have to lean in. And the City Hall and the mayor's team, of course, are laser focused on these issues. We know all of that. But on that road trip, we were prepared for crime and gun violence to be the #1 question that was asked. And can I tell you, over 5 days, it didn't come up one time. And I was shocked, and that was repeated again. We just were at a large international gathering with media from all over the world, and it didn't come up again. What that tells me is that, these issues, for one thing, are happening in cities all across America. It isn't unique to New York. And so people, in a bad way, are becoming sort of immune to this. It's a headline today, and tomorrow there's a different headline, and they move on, and they know that every city is being challenged. I don't think that's a good environment. That's not where we need to be as America, but that is the reality of the moment and where we are. I think the other thing is that people recognize the immense focus that New York City has on these issues. And they recognize the immense resources that are put against these issues, and they feel comfortable here. Where we have the challenge, and so we're not seeing any evidence that those things are holding us back when it comes to national visitation or international. Where we do have a challenge is in the tri-state, because they're laser focused on the media. Someone mentioned, I think it was you, Anthony, said your mom gets up in the morning and she turns on the news, and you, Peter, I think Peter said it as well, the first thing you see on the news is bad. And it just reinforces over and over this notion that the city is dangerous, that the media is not our friend in these environments. And so the biggest challenge we have, and we see this in our sentiment tracking studies, is with our neighbors, is with the suburbs. And by the way, that also is not unique to New York. I was with my counterpart from LA. We're hosting an LGBT travel conference right now, and he was in yesterday, and we had this exact same conversation, and he's having the exact same issues. So it's local press, it's local impressions of the community, but we need the suburbanites to be comfortable coming into the city. I mean, work aside, right, to support Broadway, to support our restaurants, to go to Little Italy, to go to the Bronx Zoo, to support Arthur Avenue Market, and to go to Boogie Down Grind. We need them to feel comfortable coming in, because the day trippers in normal times are half of our overall visitation, right? So it's the overnight visitors that are spending the money, they're spending the most money, but those those day trippers from the region are also buying tickets, supporting the arts, supporting restaurants. So we have a twofold challenge there. When I think about big picture challenges and what concerns me going forward, I think we're going to continue to spend this cushion of pent-up demand that we're riding on, and New York has the experiences that people want right now. And we're showcasing those. If you haven't, thank you for all of you that go to our website. Make sure you spend some time and check out the Black experience, the Latino experience, and the Asian experience. Those are our new permanent content hubs and travel guides promoting small businesses and cultural experiences in all 5 boroughs. We've hired new content creators from the communities to tell their own stories in their own voices. No longer are we using one voice to talk about New York City. We have a literal army of content creators and voices that are telling their own stories in their own unique ways, and that's a powerful thing. So I'm really proud of that work. And our Get Local effort also is encouraging people come to New York for the icons that you know and love, but also go into community and support small businesses. That's an important message in building back better. But when I think longer term about the inflationary pressures, there's definitely going to be pressures coming economically, both on international travelers and domestic travelers. We're already seeing it with the gas prices. I do worry about continued impacts of climate change, certainly on the airlines and their ability to fly. The cancellations that we've seen from climate change alone, in addition to what they're facing with workforce. Workforce we could have a whole nother session on, are real, but the airlines have been incredibly committed to New York, and United in particular has been wonderful in the way that they have committed to route development here, and we're very grateful to them. Lots of opportunities in Africa, which is, I'm excited to get back to the emerging markets and make sure that we're growing them. So I think about all of those issues. I think about, where are we going in terms of prioritizing visas, and that's not just for tourist visas, but also for work visas. Real pressure on being able to bring workers into the United States. It is key to what we do as a nation, as a national travel industry. Prioritizing visa approval times and making sure that travelers can get a quick and easy access to visas is going to be key. But we're still bullish on the fact that New York will resonate and it will continue to be a draw for the world, and we're going to make sure that it does. And so we will grow in 2023. It's going to continue to get harder. as we go forward, as people spend up all that pocket change that they've been saving and they've checked off the list and they're like, okay, I'm traveling again. Now where am I going to go next? We have an incredible story to tell with a product that is here, the infrastructure story, Moynihan, LaGuardia, the investments at JFK and Newark are immense. The investments the airlines are making. So I feel good about those stories, but I think we need to try harder and make sure that we're all rowing in the right direction, because it is going to get cloudier and more difficult in 23 and 24.
And what's your idea or two from another city that you'd love to see, like your dream? I mean, you more than anybody else have probably seen some things in other cities that we should be doing here.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of models out there when it comes to the work that we do. And different cities do it in different ways. Because of the strength of NYC Company over the years and the leaders that came before me, and the incredible staff that we have and the community engagement and the support of our members, we make this model work. There are other models that work, I think, even better. Look at Los Angeles just as one example. They have an incredibly robust partnership with the airports and the Port Authority there. And so they're actually paying into marketing from the port perspective to help advance international route development and international marketing and engagement with the airlines. We don't do that here in New York. We've started conversations with the port. I'm hopeful that we could develop a similar partnership there. And then, we touched on the funding models, of course, earlier. I'm watching Boston. I mean, it was interesting. NYC Company years ago, before we got the $21 million contract in 2007, we were funded on, Georgia was about $7 million, right? Was our annual budget back then. Boston has been on that same $7 million. They just moved to $40 million. So they did that through this new tourism and marketing district that they were able to build. And so Boston now has $40 million. They're coming after us because their big competitor is us. And Philadelphia is the same way between their two tourism organizations, because they're split, which is interesting. They have more money than we do too. So Washington, D.C. and New York are about neck and neck in terms of funding levels, but we have 4 or 5 times the number of hotel rooms that they have. So Boston has 1/4 of the hotel rooms that we have. So she has more money, and I say she because it's our friend Martha, who's the new CEO up there. She has 1/4 of the size of a market, and she has more money than we do. So we're pushing 4 times the hotel rooms that they are, with far less resources. So I think there's real opportunities there. And I do want to say, before I don't get the opportunity, to thank you, Jonathan, for your leadership, and for Tim's leadership, and for others in this room, Andrew, and others that have been advocating for us and have been pushing this agenda. It's really important and noted, so thank you.
All right. Questions? We've got one back in the back of the room. Really quickly, if you could.
Okay, my name is Tina Johnson, and I'm from the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice. And I just wanted to add a comment. I really like the idea of you having borough hubs and, reaching down to talk about what's going on in the neighborhoods. But one glaring thing missing, you need a green hub.
Yeah.
And I would really love to see a linkage between the tourism and climate justice and environmental justice. And I'd love to see visitors coming to New York to actually look at those things, maybe to take a Toxics to Treasure tour, or go take a visit to the sanitation, that's been developed state of the art. And I think there's a huge untapped market for it. So I just want to put that out there, because you need more money from the city, and the mayor is focused on this.
Yeah.
And it's something that's going to become a larger and larger part of New York City, and it's something that we need everybody to be involved in. And I'll just say one last thing, okay? For the work that I do, like in business, a lot of times I go out into the city, I'm participating in street fairs, and I'm talking to people, and I meet a lot of tourists in some of the places that I go. And beyond like the theater district, beyond the traditional areas where the hotels are and stuff like that, they want to know about what's outside and how to get there safely. I met a man from Ireland one Sunday, and he was so happy he found like a local type bar. And he was like, are there any bars in the neighborhood? Are there any? And, it was a funny thing, but that is also a part of tourism. we're already setting it up, and I think it would help you with your branding. So that's my comment, not really a question.
I love
Fred,
that.
I'm gonna see
Yeah.
if we can maybe get one or two more questions
Yeah.
and maybe give you a chance to respond
Sure,
to all of them
sure,
if you don't
sure.
mind, just because I know we're running out of time.
I have the worst memory. You may have to
got
help me.
one right there, and we'll take one from this side too.
Yeah.
And keep your comments to 1 minute, please. We're
Good
running out of
morning.
time.
Thank you so much for organizing this. Great to see you in person, Fred. We're with the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce, Neighborhood Economic Development, and I oversee tourism for Brooklyn. And we're working closely with your agency to support and enhance Brooklyn tourism. One of the things that we're going to be doing in sort of rolling out late summer into the fall is our Tourism Council for Brooklyn, which will be laser focused on this neighborhood approach to tourism, what we call the capital T tourism, which focuses on the large institutions, culturals, hotels, et cetera, and then the little T tourism, which is really about neighborhoods, communities, and people. And you said, Fred, that people travel to eat, drink, and socialize, and what better place to do that but a community and a neighborhood. Just really quickly, I'll give an example. This whole month of June, we've been celebrating Caribbean Heritage Month in Brooklyn, which is where a lot of the Caribbean diaspora is and lives and works. And it's, I've personally been to 3 or 4 events just in the past couple weeks, but no one here knows about it. And so how do we bring those voices to this table of tourism?
Yeah.
And we really appreciate all that NYC Company is doing. Love working with you guys. So thank you.
All right, let me take 2 more, Fred, if you don't mind. I'm back here and then back here, and then the last one in the front here.
Hey, so my name is Jonathan Tourer. I'm from the Guides Association of New York City, and Fred knows who we are. I want to make sure that everybody else knows who we are, because I think we're a solution to a lot of the challenges that people are talking about. How do people know about what's the great local neighborhood place? How do people know when they're at the Brooklyn Museum that they ought to go to the Brooklyn Botanic Garden? Because even if it's the winter, there are indoor spaces, that the Japanese Garden has great landscaping, and the Brooklyn Walk of Fame is right there. Tour guides know that. We represent a significant number of licensed New York City tour guides, and we'd like for New York City to represent the fact that there is a licensing process, and we are the ones that the city officially designates as people who are smart enough and savvy enough to be able to show people around and tell them about all of those different great things in New York City. And for the folks who are out there saying, well, we don't really know how to get to that person who's planned a tour 6 months in advance. Well, tour guides are the step-on guides who are there interacting. And when that tour planner says, we're coming, we want to make sure this itinerary makes sense. What makes sense? What's missing? We're the ones, and I just said this for a bus full of people from Michigan last week. I said, well, you've got to go and see this. If we're doing X, Y, and Z, you've got to include this. Invite the Guides Association of New York City, GANYC.org, GANYC.org. Email us at industryrelations@ganyc.org and invite us to your neighborhood for a FAM tour. We will bring our guides, and our guides will tell those tour planners. Invite us to your venue. We have monthly meetings at different venues around all 5 boroughs. Tell us about what you're doing, and we will spread the word, and we're not going to charge you any money for that. So we're really efficient.
Thanks a lot, Jonathan. That was great. Last, and we really have 20 seconds, okay?
I'm the past president. My name is Jim Kaplan. I'm the chairman and past president of the Lower Manhattan Historical Association. We're going to be running our 7th July 4th parade in Lower Manhattan. And we sponsor events in Lower Manhattan. I think what you're missing the boat on to some extent is the importance of historical tourism. There are many, many people who want to come to New York for history purposes. There are many groups, many civic groups, many patriotic groups, and we have the greatest history in the country right here in New York, particularly in Lower Manhattan. Yeah. And I didn't hear too much about that in this panel, but I think you should.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, that's a great point.
That's a great
so,
point.
Fred, that's 4 things that I'm putting on your plate.
Sure.
And just
I can do them rapid fire.
We're already over, so
Yeah,
just
I
if
see
you
that.
have any thoughts.
Yeah, I give you the quick thoughts, and I agree with you. I'm the biggest history fan, as my team knows, and I'm always talking about heritage tourism. And there's a lot of conversations happening right now, especially with Federal Hall and others, about how do we take back that narrative. New York is where the nation began. And then the United States began in New York, the first Congress, the first president. And I think as we go into the next big anniversary, certainly 2026 with the nation's 250th, we're going to be able to tell a lot more of those stories. So I'm in agreement. Yeah. Yeah. We work closely with Wellington, and I couldn't agree with you more. History is so important, and so we've got a lot going on. We'd be happy to follow up with you on that conversation. GANIC is a great resource, and to the point of trying to reach visitors in market, the guides are where you should go. We just ran a big promotion with GANIC on neighborhoods. If you're going to go into a neighborhood, think about hiring a guide. You should go with a guide. Because that's a great way to not only employ New Yorkers, but also to have a real authentic experience. I would also add the Concierge Association to that list because they're also engaging with people on the ground in the market. And it's a great way, and we can help connect you to either one of those. I agree with you on the climate justice piece. We were happy to do a panel just recently with the Harlem Chamber of Commerce and a number of, and including your office, on climate justice and the impact it has on our communities. We now have had a 5-year relationship with the Climate Group out of London. They're the organizers of the Climate Week during the United Nations General Assembly. It is now the largest climate action event in the world. And so we agree with you. We run a program with Javits and with the Climate Group every September during the UN called The Nest, which has a tourism track. Some of you may have been to The Nest, and it focuses on other sectors as well. Andrew's partnered with us on restaurant content, and climate justice is going to be one of the huge pillars of that conversation going forward. We couldn't agree with you more. And we do have a green hub. I didn't get to talk about our green hub or our historical stuff. There's a lot to talk about, but we do take that very seriously, and we've been one of the leading destinations to talk about climate change and its impact on our community. And I missed one more
Brooklyn
topic.
Chamber of Commerce.
Brooklyn Chamber.
No one knows about some of the community-based programs.
Yeah, and Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce needs to take their flowers because they have done an amazing job over the years of building the brand of Brooklyn, and we've been proud to work with them over the years, and they're partners of ours in Tourism Ready as well. And telling these stories, and I'm glad that you're working community and that you're taking that next step down that we're not able to do, and we want to make sure we talk to you about how we can help amplify what you're doing because it is so important. It's those festivals and those events, and we have been highlighting certainly Caribbean Heritage Month as well, and work closely with Shelley Worrell and her team on Little Caribbean. She's on our board, and it's so important. It's part of our whole experiences platform too. So you have our support. Let us know anything else you need. It was a great plug.
I'm going to take my prerogative to kind of editorialize or opinionate about one thing about the green ideas that came forth. I thought they were really important, and what you said about London. It strikes me that with all the talk on the first panel about events, I know we're trying to get the DNC, cultural
24.
events. Tim mentioned kind of Jazz Week, but I think that New York City, maybe Governor's Island, being such at the epicenter of issues around climate change and kind of the challenges facing, but like the impacts of climate change in this city and the waterfront, we could be a real leader as a kind of a national or a global like destination place for conversations around these issues, and maybe kind of the events that we're talking about shouldn't just be around the arts and culture, but also around some of these really, really important issues that we're all kind of going to be discussing more and more about. Anyway, that's just my crazy idea, but thank you so much, Fred. This was really tremendous, and I really appreciate the time.
Always. Thank you. Thank you.
Keep up the excellent work, and to your staff as well. But thank you again for all this time and for the great thoughts. Thank you all for coming today. Thanks for everybody online.
Thank you for engagement.
And another last big thank you to our sponsors, United and Airbnb. Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.